The 2025 Imola GP. Ah yes, after 6 whole weekends of f***ing about, we finally get to go to Europe, particularly to the stunning country of Italy, the home of motorsports, Kimi Antonelli, and Oscar Piastri's 9th home race. Apparently. And to an actual fixed racetrack no less, particularly Imola, with the classic weekend format, known to produce great racing like in 2021, where it was pissing down with rain and gave us the first of many controversies between Max and Lewis, and one of the scariest crashes in modern F1. Or 2024, where McLaren caught Red Bull for the first time and gave us an amazing fight, or I guess a chase for the lead I should say. And how could I forget Alonso versus Schumacher in 05? This year, however, the circumstances are completely different to last year, as it's no longer McLaren catching Red Bull, but rather the former completely obliterating everyone as they did last weekend by finishing 1-2 by 33 seconds to the closest non-McLaren car. A performance so dominant that it's practically impossible to replicate, because they're beatable after all, as proven by Max Verstappen. But at least most teams brought upgrades, although that unfortunately includes McLaren too, and most of them didn't work. I mean, Leclerc's helmet was literally coming off, so I can't imagine that that was an intentional design feature. But there was also an important revelation ahead of this weekend that I just have to talk about, which is Max Verstappen retiring after giving birth and being replaced by Franz Herrmann at Red Bull. If you haven't heard, Franz is a rookie GT3 driver known to crash out on Twitter and impressively set a track record during NLS testing at the Nürburgring. But I must say, Franz sure does look suspiciously similar to Sid from Ice Age, who looks suspiciously similar to Max Verstappen. I wonder what's going on here. But Max wasn't the only one to get the boot, because Jack was sacked and replaced in favor of Alpine's reserve driver Franco Colapinto too. A shocking move that we didn't see coming at all. Like, I was completely geeked out, discombobulated, and straight up confuzzled when I first heard these news 3 months ago. And whilst this swap is somewhat understandable looking at Jack's performance, his dad certainly disagrees and wasn't doing Jake any favors by spazzing out on his Instagram story by posting Gasly's race results, presumably hinting that he's doing worse. You know, the same driver that finished 3rd last year in an Alpine and won a race in an AlphaTauri. Just yikes. This of course all happened in light of even more Alpine leadership disaster, with the previous team principal Oliver Oakes stepping down conveniently after his brother William, the high-tech GP Formula 2 director, got arrested at Silverstone, then charged with transferring criminal property, in other words huge amounts of cash, that is reportedly tied to the Russian state through a ghost company based in the UAE that no one knows anything about, with some people suspecting that it's the Mazepins trying to buy themselves back into F1, which makes sense considering high-tech randomly decided to try to move up to F1. I wonder where that much money would have come from if not from these two Eggmen. And if you thought that was shady, Oliver's replacement is none other than the literal mafia boss who fixed the race back in 2008, got banned and resurrected from the dead, Flavio Briatore, who's 75 by the way, so if he passes away, rest assured he will be replaced by a very law-abiding and upstanding citizen. Like a cartel boss, nothing too crazy. Man, Force India and Rich Energy have nothing on Alpine management, honestly. But anyways, let's get into the weekend itself. In free practice 1, Albon went off track and so did Leclerc and Gasly. Lewis Hamilton was piloting the world's most expensive lawnmower, Franco was busy getting used to his lawnmower, Franz's Red Bull was still complete booty cheeks, whilst McLaren were busy being the opposite, finishing 1-2, and the session was concluded early after Gabi binned it all by himself. In FP2, Kimi almost crashed into Yuki, then tried his hand at cutting grass. Franz Herrmann busted on his hand.
Almost hit the second part. So I had it not in my hand, but fell into my seat.
Lewis then went off and was completely blocked on his flying lap, with both Ferrari drivers probably missing their Lego car after trying the brakes on the real one. Alonso almost hit Franco, and Isaac Hadjar spun all over the place and got stuck, bringing out the second session-ending red flag in a row. McLaren were still flying, and Gasly was shockingly up in 3rd, which is very poor from him. He would have been 2nd or 1st, honestly. That's just embarrassing. At the final practice session, Piastri finally made an error, and so did Russell. Hamilton's pain and suffering didn't stop, Lawson then spun just like his teammate did, and Franz was getting used to his RB, with the session ending with a McLaren 1-2, Franz in 3rd, and Lewis all the way down in 10th. Finally, it's time for some competitive sessions. In Q1, Yuki Tsunoda had a huge shunt which brought out the red flag. This crash was obviously not ideal for him when Helmut Marko will use any excuse he can to sack him later in the season. McLaren were still as dominant as ever after the red flag, Verstappen somehow managed P1, Fernando Alonso was all the way up in 3rd, then Franco completely binned it by himself, which isn't a great look considering the nickname some people have been calling him after last year, but he also never had preseason testing or anything like that, so keep that in mind. And for all it's worth, he was still good enough for Q2. This caused Ollie's lap to not count, so he awkwardly sat in the car for 30 minutes after he was eliminated, and this was also the case with Lawson. And after approximately 7 decades, 8 ice ages, and 40 delays, Q2 got underway, and 3 minutes in, it was McLaren 1-2 again, but at least it was quite close this time. On the final runs, Ferrari's pace was so horrid to the point where both Aston Martins went faster on mediums no less because of the terrible tire degradation, sending them out of Q2. The home hero Kimi was also eliminated in 13th, and Williams apparently put rocket fuel on Sainz's car as he was P1. The first runs were very competitive, but it was Verstappen from the two McLarens, and I must say, it was surreal seeing the top 10 on the graphics without a single Ferrari, just midfield teams apart from the top 4. On the second run, it was a mix of tires again. Piastri was first across the line with a cracking lap. Norris made a couple of mistakes, so he was 3/10ths back, beaten by Verstappen who was just 34/100ths back, with George Russell in 4th, and Hadjar was down in 9th and had a nervous breakdown. Now that the grid has been beautifully set up, it's time for the real deal. It was lights out and Max Verstappen had an awful initial start, which opened the door to Russell, who had a good start and held off Norris. But Franz Hermann had a trick up his sleeve as he proceeded to pull one of the most beautiful moves I've ever seen into turn 1. Pierre and Leclerc went side by side, which ended in tears as Gasly had to take to the gravel, and whilst Leclerc was moving up the order, Hamilton lost a place to Antonelli and got stuck behind him. Russell was the first of the front runners to come in, which opened the door for Lando to start catching Oscar. Leclerc then pit, which was definitely a great idea and didn't cause a certain kind of thought to start in Leclerc's head after what was about to happen next. Fernando soon followed him to the box and his brakes caught on fire. Again, Oscar was then brought in, which was a bit problematic for him as he had to clear Tsunoda, who was explicitly told on the radio to hold him up, but sadly for Max, Yuki is no Minister of Defense. But that was just the beginning for Piastri as he continued to lose time everywhere due to the traffic and dirty air. But all of that ultimately didn't matter as on lap 30 Norris was finally in the box and had the worst luck ever, since 2 seconds later Ocon got stranded after his Ferrari power unit died, just like a billion of them did last race. This brought out a virtual safety car obviously, allowing Verstappen to get a free pit stop along with everyone else who hadn't pitted, including Albon, who was miraculously up in the net 3rd place in a Williams. Alonso's awesome race that was completely shattered by the safety car got even worse as he got overtaken by Sauber of all cars, and after Leclerc pulled his shit together, he was absolutely flying to the point of catching his teammate who had the fortune of the better strategy. Antonelli then had an issue and retired exactly where Ocon did, which means, you guessed it, a safety car, a real one this time. This allowed Max to come in along with Norris, which means we essentially had a sprint race on our hands, which finally got underway after way too long, but only Leclerc managed to make a move on Albon for 4th, and McLaren bottled their only chance at the win by not allowing Norris through despite his fresher tires, which is even stupider now looking back considering Norris still made it through anyway. Albon then tried in the final laps to move back up to 4th, which ended in tragedy just like it did with Gasly, but it was Verstappen who drove perfectly to win the race, with the two Ferraris actually doing great considering their horrendous qualifying, Tsunoda getting a point despite a pit lane start, and Franco Colapinto will be extremely grateful for the safety cars as they ruined Gasly's race, which makes it look like on paper that they had similar pace, so when he gets sacked, his dad can use this result to show that Gasly and Franco are actually the same. But what a fitting end to Imola on the F1 calendar that was. In the Drivers' Championship, Max caught up to Piastri a little, whilst in the Constructors, Ferrari are inching ever closer to overtaking Red Bull. But click on the videos on screen for elite F1 takes, and see ya.